The great part is we can learn warmth and competence cues. So we can actually dial up or upgrade, as you say, our charisma. The more cues that you know, the more empowered you are. These cues are already affecting you. The question is, can you take advantage of them?
Vanessa, I want to start off talking about the cues people are using without even knowing it that is killing their charisma.
Okay, I call those red flags. So remember that when we're thinking about cues, there's a lot of different ways we're sending cues. So we're sending cues through our face, our voice, our body, our posture, our gestures. And we also can do this on email, phone, in person, video. So what's interesting is there's these specific cues that are red flags. And the reason they're called red flags is because when other people see them, when you encode a cue, you're sending a cue to someone else and they decode it, these make them feel a little uneasy. So it could be that they indicate guilt, they indicate withholding, they indicate anger or shame. They make people feel uneasy in some way. So one of the most common ones, there's so many common red flags. I would say one of the most common ones that I see is actually a facial one. And this is even more so on video. We're doing so much on video now that we're very attuned to facial expressions, even more so than in person because it's all we have, right? You can't see my feet. We can't handshake or high five. So here's a red flag that's a face cue, which is the lip purse. So a lip purse is a very simple cue. It's universal. Whereas when someone is withholding something, they literally try to keep it in by pressing their lips together into a firm line. So if you're listening to this, just press your lips together into a firm line. Sometimes people will mash them together. The reason why this is interesting is because most of the red flags, not all of them, are also deception cues. In other words, when researchers who study lie detection research what do liars commonly do, a lot of the red flags are things that liars do. The lip purse is one of them. Why? Liars don't want to get in trouble. They know the lie is going to get them into trouble. So they press their lips together right before they lie or right after they lie, as if their body is saying, keep it in, keep it together. So I want you to be aware of this because I think in professional settings, especially, we're trying to be so buttoned up. We're trying to say things perfectly. We're trying to say things in the right way. And so sometimes people will accidentally do a lip purse when they're trying to keep it together. So what I would actually say, an aspect of authenticity is first being aware if you feel yourself do that lip purse, ask yourself, what am I hiding? What am I withholding? Because it does make the other person feel like, what is she hiding? Or what is he hiding? What is he withholding? Is there something you can say? And also, what is the emotional trigger there, right? Like, what is making you feel unsafe? Just being aware of my own lip purses, I did a lot of self-discovery about what I was trying to keep together. And I was like, I don't think I want to do that anymore. So it's a good self-exploration exercise too.
And in the book, you give the example of a lip purse that many of us saw in the public eye, and that was Lance Armstrong when he was being grilled about doping.
Oh my goodness. So, okay. I don't know if you remember where you were when you saw this interview. I remember where I was. This was many, many years ago. Lance Armstrong is on Larry King Live, and he is flat out lying, right? He is literally saying, I have never doped. I would never dope, which we now know is completely false. When I watched that interview, it was a red flag. I got that spidey sense of something ain't right. Something is not right here. And now, as a behavior researcher, when I went back to analyze interviews, so for the book, I was able to go back to moments in time from my teenage years, my 20s, looking for moments where I thought, was there something there? And I was able to reanalyze, the Bill Clinton testimony, Lance Armstrong, I didn't make it into the book, but when Kanye West took Taylor Swift's award, all those moments. And this one was the most astonishing. Right after he shared his lie with Larry King, he did a very distinct hard lip purse, as if his brain was saying to him, keep it together, keep it in. And we immediately, watching, knew, something he's holding back. He's not saying everything. That's also an invitation. So with cues, we want to think about what we're sending. But we also want to decode correctly. So if I'm with someone and I see a lip purse, I take that as an opportunity. So that's the moment where I'll say, anything else I should know? Are we all good here? You explained that aspect, but can we try to talk about it again? Giving them an opportunity, a safe place to tell me what's really happening. I think that cues are just little flags to say, dig deeper, tell me more.
That's a good point. So we have cues that when somebody listens to what we're talking about today, can become more aware of how they're projecting themselves. And then there's cues in the environment and using those as clues and help us navigate the world and our relationships in a better way.
Yes. So for anyone who's an awkward person, so I like to joke that I'm a recovering awkward person. I have a really hard time understanding cues. I'm not naturally good with people. I'm very ambiverted and I have a lot of social anxiety. And what research found this for anyone who's listening who has any kind of social anxiety or awkwardness or severe introversion, I hope this will make you feel better. It gave me a lot of relief. People with social anxiety often misinterpret facial cues. So, what would happen for me is I would go to a party or a date or a meeting, and I would think everyone hates me. I sound really dumb. No one likes me. And I would leave and I would turn to my husband and I would say, I think she's really mad at me. He'd be like, what? I'd be like, did you see her face? He's like, what face? And this study showed me that actually people who have social anxiety often misinterpret neutral cues as negative. So what's critically important is knowing the cues that are being sent to you so you know which ones you have to take seriously, like a lip purse, like some of the red flags, and which ones you don't. Which ones are neutral that actually you're good, you're doing fine. So my back door into conquering some of my anxiety was actually just knowing the cues that are being sent to me and knowing exactly what cues sent to others.
And I think an important point within what you just said is the fact that you've recovered from this, which means that these cues are something that we can learn about, work on, and even become an expert like you have and teach other people. So there is
Yes,
hope here for
there's
somebody who
hope.
is tuning in and feeling like they're hopeless or their whole life to this point. They haven't, been able to navigate those social interactions with others. It's a
Yeah,
skill
and
you need to work on.
yes, and also, if you've ever felt like things are missing or like you missed a memo or like, why does everyone know this and I don't? It actually might be that you missed the memo, right? If you don't naturally have this ability, it's very hard to learn it. There's very little places we teach it. The good news is there's only 96 cues, right? If you know the 96, you're good. And some of the cues you're going to love. You're going to be like, oh, I love this cue. I want to do it all the time. I do it naturally. Some of the cues I'm going to have to convince you, I'm going to have to really convince you to try. And then you'll adopt them and be like, okay, I get it. And some of the cues you're going to be like, not for me. I think that's the beauty of humanity is we don't all want to be the same robotic kind of charisma. And this was a mistaken belief that I had. I used to think that there was one flavor of charisma. That to be charismatic, you had to be a bubbly extrovert. You had to be outgoing, you had to be the life of the party. And that is simply not true. That is one flavor of charisma. Yes, you can absolutely be a charismatic extrovert, but you can also be a very charismatic, quiet, powerful introvert. You can also be a compassionate, empathetic, charismatic healer. Like there are different flavors of charisma. And so, kind of that mix of which cues you like and which you don't, for me, it felt like I got to reset my presence and I got to reset. There's hope that I could start over. I could change in a way, a nonverbal makeover. Ugh, I don't know if I love that phrase, but you know what I mean. Yeah, you know what I mean.
I want to make sure we take time and get really practical for people and get into a lot of the cues so they can assess their environment over the next period of time. Well, beyond that, for the rest of their life, but really get in and do that detective work if they haven't done to this point. But before we do so, we've been talking a lot about charisma, and that's what these cues can lead to. But let's talk about why that is such an important trait for someone who wants to, you know, upgrade, it might be the wrong word, but have
You're right. Yeah.
deeper, better relationships with the people in their life.
Upgrade, level up. I like all those phrases. So, first, charisma can be learned. So I used to think that charisma was an innate trait. You either born with it or you weren't. I would look at the cool kids across the room and be like, wow, they're so cool. I'll never have that. But actually, most charismatic people, they have learned and honed it. So that's the one thing is to learn trait. The second thing, and this was really a life-changing study for me. So this came out of Princeton University by Dr. Susan Fisk. And what Dr. Fisk began to research is how we judge humans, how we judge each other. And what she found is that the two most important traits for very highly charismatic people, and by charisma, I mean people we're drawn to, people that we immediately like and want to be with, people that we feel like we can open up to, people we feel we can rely on and trust. Those people, what they are doing is they have extremely high levels of warmth and competence. just those two traits. Not only do they have high levels of those traits, they are constantly signaling or cueing to others, I am high in warmth and I am high in competence. And this is so powerful because when we're with someone, we are first trying to decide, can I trust you? Am I safe with you? Are you going to be on my side? Once we find the right cues, and they're verbal, vocal, and nonverbal, right? So those are typically the cues that we're looking for is warmth cues in those areas. Once we decide we can trust someone, the very next question we ask is, can I rely on you? So is what you're saying accurate? Is it going to help me? Are you telling me the truth? If we can very quickly answer those two questions about a person, we are drawn to them. That is literally the definition of charisma. And the great part is we can learn warmth and competence cues. So we can actually dial up or upgrade, as you say, our charisma.
And the whole idea, taking that one step further, is to have the balance between the two. So
Yeah.
the ideal for charisma, you do a nice little chart in the book, and it's having high warmth, high competence. What we want to do is make sure we're creating a balance. Like you said, those are the two traits that we're going to portray through different cues,
Yes.
and we want to create a balance within those two.
Yes. So you mentioned the most important point, which is most of us have an imbalance. The reason why we're not all amazingly charismatic creatures is most of us are sending too many warmth cues and not enough competence cues, too many competence cues and not enough warmth cues, or the danger zone, neither of either cue. So no warmth and no competence. And so it's about hitting that sweet spot of hitting both. And by the way, we are doing this all the time. So it's not just in our in-person interactions or our videos. Even on our websites, in our LinkedIn profiles, on our social media, we are gauging warmth and competence with all the different cues we're sending, the words we use, the expressions we use, our vocal tone. And the last little category is our ornaments. So, like our background of our video, the clothes we wear, the colors we wear. I'm drinking a matcha. That's a cue, right? So, like all of those are even cues that add up to, do you have an equal balance of warmth and competence?
And the scary or exciting part about this is there's no pause button. Right away, as soon as you connect on a call like this or meet somebody in person, whether you want to or not, through all the different means, they're going to start
Yes.
picking up on things and you're going to be giving away what it is that's happening inside you in subtle or maybe not so subtle ways.
Yes. Okay. So can I share a study that I think perfectly speaks to the power, the terrifying power of that? It's
Please
good news
do.
and bad news. It's good news and bad news, right? There's no pause button, but it also means we have so many opportunities. So this was a study specifically in the vocal cues section. So, there's nonverbal body language, there's vocal, our tone or volume or pace or cadence, and our verbal, and then lastly, imagery. Vocal is the one where I think we really don't realize there's no pause button. So, what research has found is that we decide how confident someone is within 200 milliseconds of hearing them. Now, this means that you can prep the best speech in the world, the funniest examples, the best presentation. You can have the perfect answers to your interview. You can have the perfect pitch. But your first impression on confidence is when you say, hello. That's it. That's your first impression. So, what they did is this fascinating study where they took doctors. And I was so happy that this study was about doctors because doctors are people that we already know have a level of expertise, right? They've gone through many years of school to be doctors. They wanted to know if vocal changes, vocal cues could change our perceptions of doctors' warmth and competence. This is all coming out of, by the way, that original research study was in 2002. There's been many, many research studies on this warmth and competence. They're proving it in a lot of different ways all over in lots of demographics. And this is one of them. So they were like, okay, we have to be high in warmth and competence. Do we decide someone's warmth and competence based on their vocal cues? So what they did is they brought doctors into their lab and they had them record 10-second voice tone clips. So now we're going to get into the nitty gritty. So in these voice tone clips, the doctors had to say their name, where they worked, and what they did. So it sounded like this. Hi, my name is Dr. Edwards. I specialize in oncology and I work at Children's Presbyterian Hospital. Took these clips and they warbled the words. So you could hear the pace, the cadence, the volume, but not the actual words being said. So that sounded like this. Okay. Sounds so weird to do that, but yes. Then they asked participants to listen to these clips and rate them on warmth and competence. Now imagine this for a second. You're given a clip of gobbledygook and you're asked, how nice is this person? How smart is this person? They found the doctors who had the lowest warmth and competence ratings across the board had the highest rate of malpractice lawsuits. In other words, we don't just decide how skilled a doctor is by their work. We decide how skilled a doctor is the moment we first hear them. And that is based on their vocal cues. So, a couple patterns they found. If you're wondering, how do I sound more warm and competent? Here's a couple patterns they found. First, the doctors who had the lowest warmth and competence ratings used the uptalk or question inflection. So, uptalk or the question inflection is when we go up at the end of our sentence. So, it sounds like we're asking questions, even though we're actually not. We're saying things. So, their clip sounded like this. Hi, my name is Dr. Edwards, and I specialize in oncology, and I work at Children's Presbyterian Hospital. What's killer about this is I think many of us accidentally use the question inflection when we're trying to ask for permission. So I cannot tell you how many video calls or phone calls or voicemails I hear where the start of the meeting, the first 10 seconds, your vocal first impression is like this. Good morning, everyone. Excited to see you. We'll get started in a few. Oh, it's like giving away all your confidence.
That's so fascinating. What other areas were they able to assess from that study, and what were they detecting in the voice that was making the people less charismatic?
Yes. So many. Actually, before I talk about the next one, I also want to mention for the question inflection, it's not just in your first introduction. So make sure that you're saying your name, not asking your name, right? So go listen to your voicemail. Make sure the first couple seconds of your interactions, you're saying, my name is Vanessa, not my name is Vanessa, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is something that we found, not in this study, was that we do, I love doing lie detection at Science People. And so one of the experiments we did at Science People is we asked participants to submit videos of themselves lying on camera, specifically playing two truths and a lie. You know, this is when you say two true statements and a lie about yourself. And one thing that we found is that people asked their lie. So we'll play. You want to play, Jesse? You want to
Yeah,
try
let's
this?
do it.
Okay. All right. Here we go. Two truths and a lie about me. See if you can guess which one it is. I love dogs. I grew up in Los Angeles. I love cilantro. Which is the lie?
I love cilantro.
Right, because I asked it, right? So that was something we heard over and over again is because liars, they don't believe what they're saying. So they're asking, do you believe this? So I share this because uptalk on important information is critical to make sure that you're saying it, not asking it. Prices, timelines, numbers. We do tons of sales analysis where I'll analyze sales calls and we can predict who's going to have low close rates based on this one cue. So people who are having negotiation issues, they're not able to close, they will ask their price. So they'll be doing great. They'll be saying, you know, we'd love to have your business. We'd love to work with you. And the price of the service is $5,000. When you ask a number, you are begging someone to negotiate with you. You are telling them, I don't really believe this number, so you shouldn't either. So also make sure that if you have some important information to give, a price, a number, a timeline, a date, a deadline, make sure you say it, not ask it. Okay, the second
What's so
question.
fascinating, I want to jump in real quick. As you're talking about that, it gets me thinking about us as Canadians. We tend to
Mhm.
say A at the end of things, which again, same as a question, we're kind of looking for that acknowledgement at the end. So I'm wondering if this is something you've studied or thought about.
So I have anecdotally, I would love to do a study on this for New Zealanders, Kiwis, and for Canadians. I would love to do a vocal study on or also the Kiwi accent just tends to go up at the end of their sentences. It's part of their intonation pattern. I wonder if they'll get more pushback on a sales call. I would love to test it. I'm going to guess yes, only because innately as humans, they've actually found that when someone is listening to someone speak and the question inflection is accidentally used on a statement, where the brain listens switches. So the brain goes from just listening to scrutinizing. So the brain actually recognizes, even if we're not consciously aware of it, wait a minute, why'd they just ask that? So it has to be the case, and this is a completely subconscious exercise. It has to be the case that if someone says something really powerful, if you're Canadian and you say something really powerful, but you end with A, It has to trigger something in the brain. So I would love to study it. Let's do it. Let's study that
Interesting.
next.
I like that. Well, let's come back to the doctors. We got the
Okay.
study where they take their text and they jumble it up and they play it back for people. What else did they learn from that?
Okay, this is so up talk was the kind of beginner cue. This is the advanced cue. So the next thing they found is nuanced but really important. The doctors who had the highest warmth and competence ratings, so balance of both, used the lowest end of their natural tone. What they find is that all humans, both male and female, have a range, a vocal range. So right now, I am working very hard to stay in the lowest end of my natural range. Now, when I'm talking to my daughter or I'm a little bit nervous, I'll end up going up like this. Now, this is also my natural range. It's very natural for me to speak like this. But if I were to do my entire podcast like this, it would drive you crazy. So I'm working really hard to stay in the lower end of my range. What's key about this is it wasn't the lowest, the male with the lowest baritone did best. It wasn't like the lowest voice did best. No, it was just that the person had to be using the lower end of their range. The reason for this is because when we're listening to someone, we're trying subconsciously to hear someone's confidence. And when someone is anxious, their vocal cords literally tighten. So what I'll do for you right now so you can hear is I'm going to tighten my vocal cords for you so you can hear what it sounds like in anxiety. So right now my vocal cords are relaxed. But let's say that I were to tighten my vocal cords. So immediately I go higher in my range. It's also I get vocal fry. So you get that like sizzling sound. And that's because in anxiety, my vocal cords are very tense. It's hard to get sound out of them. Now, the moment I relax my vocal cords, it should feel way better. You're like, oh, thank goodness. That is because we don't want to listen to someone in anxiety. We don't want to catch it. When we hear someone who has anxious vocal cords, we wonder, why are they so anxious? Should I be anxious too? So doctors who were very anxious at this recording and also tend to be more anxious, I think that that's the signals they were sending to their patients. Patients are like, I don't know if I can trust this person. They're nervous. I don't want a doctor who's nervous. And then they're less likely to follow their prescription. They're less likely to follow their advice. So what I want you to think about, the really practical takeaway, and this is the hardest one, is I want you to hear yourself as you're speaking. When you hear yourself go a little higher in your range, or you hear yourself go into vocal fry, especially at the end of a sentence, that is a signal to you that you either are out of breath or you're feeling a little bit anxious. The best thing you can do is the moment you hear yourself do that is to take a deep breath in and speak on the out breath. So when I speak on the out breath, it actually forces my vocal cords to relax. The biggest vocal mistake that people make is they speak on the up breath all the way up here. So the very first impression I hear, and we actually took vocal recordings and we put them into like a sound software, and I could see people are highest in their range in the first 5 seconds of a call. Why? They're nervous. They're watching it ring, ring, or they're waiting for Zoom to dial in, waiting. And they go, hey, good to see you. And they're like, good to see you. So they take in this big breath of air, they speak on the top of their breath, and they go the highest they possibly can. So every time, first of all, in the first impression, make sure you're speaking on the out breath. So not hello, but instead hello, totally different. And when you hear yourself going tight, take a deep breath in, quick pause, and speak on the out breath.
For somebody who, now that they're tuning in, realizes that they're giving away some of these cues that they probably don't want to be, at least in the long term, and they're in a conversation with somebody, or they're, connecting with somebody on Zoom, and then they start to get in their head and they start to, anxiety starts to build because they've quote unquote made some mistakes. Well, like, how much of this gets taken into account when somebody, even consciously or subconsciously after the interaction?
Yeah.
Like, what I'm trying to do here is take the pressure off. If somebody makes a quote unquote mistake or two during an interaction, is there any hope for them as a whole?
For sure. Oh my goodness. I wouldn't be here if there wasn't room for lots of mistakes. I mean, even in this interview, I'm making mistakes, quote unquote mistakes. I don't even think of them that way. I think of them as just missed opportunities, right? So if you accidentally use the question inflection or you accidentally lip purse, okay, like that was a moment where you might have given a little bit of confidence away, but it doesn't mean you can't get it back. Also, one of the exercises that I think could be helpful is There are low-hanging fruit cues. What I mean by that is typically, and we've had over 3 million people go through this process. Typically, people have 2 to 3 nervous tells that are constantly undermining their credibility and their confidence. It's not 96. It's usually just 2 or 3. So one thing that I would recommend you do, and I have this exercise in the book, but I'll just walk you through it now, is after this, please get out your camera and I want you to answer 3 questions on camera. The goal here is we're going to try to find your nervous tells. We're going to try to find the cues that are not working for you. Because if you can just get rid of those 2 or 3, oh my goodness, that's like half the battle. So first I want you to open your camera and you can write this down so you remember. So the first question, I want you to look at the camera, pretend that you're talking to me. So pretend that you're really talking to someone. And I want you to tell me, what did you have for breakfast yesterday? Try to not pre-think of the answer, by the way. Try to just like do it. Like I want to see what you look like when you're recalling. However you recall and answer that question is your recall truthful memory. It's what you look like when you're remembering something. Do you lip purse? Do you use uptalk? Does your vocal fry go up? It might be that just even recalling something, you're accidentally giving some confidence away. Okay. Second question. I want you to tell me your most embarrassing story in as much detail as possible. Really pretend you're telling this to me. And by the way, the full exercise, I think, is in chapter 6 of like what you can do to code, but you can do this absolutely on your own right now. What I want you to do for this is we're looking for your nervous tells. What do you look like when you're telling the truth about something that makes you nervous? Ideally, by the way, it's an embarrassing story that's actually embarrassing, like not just funny, but like really gets your heart pumping. Like I have a couple moments where I'm just like, oh, you can like feel the cringe. That's what I want to see. I want to know what your body does in cringe, right? Do you crumple in on yourself? Do you touch your nose? Do you anger? Do you show an anger micro expression? Do you use less hand gestures, more hand gestures? Those are all the things we want to know, because when you get nervous in a negotiation, on a date, in an interview, that's what you look like. And those are the cues that you want to make sure that you're changing into confidence, right? To try to harness that confidence. The last question, the hardest one, again, I try not to pre-think about your answers, is please tell me a fake embarrassing story. So pretend that it happened to you, but it cannot be something that actually happened to you. The key with this exercise, and we've done this with hundreds of our participants on camera where we had them do this exercise and we coded their videos. This is what you look like when you're lying. I personally think it's important for everyone to know their lying tells. What do you do when you're giving away truth? Not because I want you to be a better liar. Please don't let that be the takeaway of this book, but to actually know what do you do when you're in shame? What do you do when you're in guilt? What do you do when you're trying to think quickly on your feet? It's really important to know what your body, your voice, your words do. Like, for example, we noticed when we had participants do this in our lab, on the last video, people typically used words like honest, truth. So they would say, honestly, it was one of the worst days in my life. To tell you the truth, I couldn't believe what happened to me. I swear to God, that's what happened. And so oddly, when people were lying, they tended to try to use more truth words as if to convince themselves and maybe us that they were telling the truth. So weird things like that will come out for you. And that's a really good thing to know about yourself.
Somebody that's tuning in at this point might start getting a little bit overwhelmed, trying to control, their voice and keep
No,
it
don't be
low and
overwhelmed.
how their hands are moving when they're talking and their facial movements. No, this is important we get into this, because what would you say to a person who is starting to feel that way? Like, does a lot of this become second nature is what I'm getting at? Because it can sound
Yes.
overwhelming and sound like you're going to be in your head a lot when you're in these interactions with people, at least in the beginning. How second
Yeah.
nature does this become?
So first is it's actually really empowering. So think of it like a foreign language. So when you learn a foreign language, right, the more words you learn, the more empowered you are. Yes, you have to keep more in your head, but every word that you learn in a foreign language, you can speak more, you can understand more, you can express yourself more. It's the same thing with cues. So the more cues that you know, the more empowered you are. Just like a language, you can choose to use them or not. Sometimes you can't even help but use them once you've learned them. And so actually it's really empowering. The more cues you add to your tool belt. Like, for example, so far we've talked about the lip purse, we've talked about up talk, and we've talked about low tone, right? You are never going to be able to unlearn those. I'm so sorry, but you'll never unlearn those. You will start to see a lip purse everywhere, and you won't even have to think about it. You also will feel yourself do it and be like, oh, interesting. I just lip pursed when I was talking to that person. Or, I lip purse a lot when I'm talking to my mother in law. That's interesting. Right. So it actually just gives you more information, which takes down anxiety, which makes you feel more confident. So actually think of it like learning a foreign language. Every word you learn gives you more power. And the second thing is, we started with 3, we'll learn more as we keep going. Pick one. Pick one to actively tackle at the end. So if you're like, okay, I'm going to do that video exercise, or just going to work on my low tone, starting with one consciously, I have like a little like layout of how you can do it. That just one at a time, they will become like muscle memory, especially the nonverbal cues.
Earlier, you mentioned hand gestures, and this is something as
Yes.
I go back and watch my interviews, I realize how much my hands are involved and I can't even control it. They're just like,
Nope.
it's like I'm a conductor in front of a band and they're just flailing. You can tell me, is this too much? Is
Oh,
it
they're
a good
great.
thing? Like, talk about hand gestures and when they're good and when they become too much.
Well, first of all, you are not flailing. They are magical and amazing, but I love hand gestures. So all cues fall on a spectrum. And what I mean by this is there's no perfect amount of hand gestures. Everyone has different gestures. This is also different across cultures, right? So some of the cues in the book are universal, some of them are a little bit cultural. So the spectrum is really helpful because, like in Italy, for example, people use way more hand gestures. That's considered more normal, right? Whereas in some East Asian cultures, people use far less hand gestures. So what's important here is one, that you feel natural. And if you feel natural, it's going to really help. Second is hand gestures are incredibly important for both the listener and the speaker. And this is the weird thing about gestures, which we don't realize. So we did a whole bunch of gesture research for my TED Talks. I gave a TED Talk in 2017. And what we did is we analyzed thousands of hours of TED Talks looking for patterns. What we did is I wanted to know, okay, TED Talks are all given by experts, right? You're only asked to give a TED Talk if you're an author or an expert in your area. So they're all good, right? There's no, flub on a TED Talk stage. There's no, someone who's doesn't know what they're talking about on a TED Talk stage. So they're all good. What makes some great? Why is some TED Talks go viral and some don't? So we took as all the top TED Talks from 2010 and all the bottom TED Talks from 2010. We wanted to take old ones to give them time to kind of marinate. And we analyzed all the cues in all those TED Talks looking for patterns. Was there differences between the top speakers and the bottom speakers? What we found was his gestures was the most obvious pattern. When you literally compare the top TED Talk from 2010 and the bottom TED Talk from 2010, you can see the amount of gestures is different. Specifically, the most popular TED Talkers use an average of 465 gestures in 18 minutes. This is the talks from 2010, whereas the least popular TED Talkers in our study used 272 gestures in 18 minutes. This is almost half. And what's happening is research shows that gestures aid in comprehension. So when I say I have 3 big ideas and I hold up the number 3, your brain goes, there really are 3. That's congruent, right? I'm speaking to you on 2 levels, my hands and my words. But if I were to say I have 3 different ideas and hold up the number 5, you're like, what? Your brain is actually more likely to believe my gesture. We actually see gestures as more truthful than words. It's hard to lie. That was so hard. I just said 3, but I held up 5. Just try this for me wherever you are right now. I want you to say 3 and hold up 5. You ready? 3.
Three,
Try it. Wasn't that so
three.
hard?
I don't know if I've ever done that. That
And then
is
try to,
weird.
it's so, or like try like 2 and say 10. 10.
10.
It's
Wild.
your brain should be like, no, 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 no. It like short circuits your brain because your brain likes to make gestures congruent. This is a great nonverbal hack because it means that really good speakers, speakers who are high in competence, this is specifically a competence cue, align their gestures with their words. They literally signal their competence by saying, I know my content so well that I can speak to you on 2, read them 2 different tracks. I can speak to you with my words and my gestures. You'll notice that novice speakers or amateurs who don't really know their stuff, they have no gestures or the wrong gestures. And so gestures is a way that we gauge competence. And so natural gesturing like you do is amazing because I know that you're processing out loud and your gestures are matching your words. What you want to make sure of is that when you are nervous, you don't shut down your gesturing. And this happens a lot when we're very, very nervous. Liars often hide their gestures because they don't want their gestures to give them away, right? So if I were to say, today I have a really big idea and hold up my fingers like I'm holding something small, that's an incongruency, right? It's an incongruence. You're like, no, it's small, Vanessa. It doesn't look big at all. So we're like, when we're nervous or we're lying, we hide our gestures. So if you have something you're nervous about, I want you to practice saying it and bring back your gestures. Bring back how you would normally speak because our brain is aware when gestures go away. And the second thing is if you're explaining something complicated or important, can you emphasize points along with your words? So I always explain this to my engineers, some of my sales folks. I do a lot of business consulting with B2B sales where things are quite complicated. The best gift you can give to your listeners is to try to outline with your hands. So I could say, all right, this project is pretty big. I hold my hand up like a beach ball. It's pretty big. But we're going to break it down into 3 different phases. So the first phase, I start on my left. The first phase, we're going to be doing X, Y, and Z. And I'm holding my hands in the first phase so they can know that's all the first phase. The second phase, that's the sales phase, we're going to do A, B, and C. And I'm holding my hands in the middle. And the last phase is going to be, K, L, and Q. That actually helps your listeners break down the content. And also it gives you a ton of credibility because it shows, wow, she's really organized. She could even describe this with her gestures. So beginning to think about gestures as teaching aids is so helpful.
2 things I want to highlight when it comes to using the hands. One
I
being
love it.
open palms are a good thing. So when you're in front of a crowd or even when you're greeting somebody, open palms, that's a good one.
Yes.
And 2, we don't want to point at somebody. So talk more about those 2.
Yes. So we talked about gestures as competence cues, but there are aspects of our hands that can be warmth cues, which is kind of amazing that our body works this way. So think about this. This makes sense from a logical perspective. If I was approached by a stranger caveman back in caveman days, and I wasn't sure if they were friend or foe, and they held up their hand in an open palm to say hello as a little wave, I could see, they're not holding a rock or a spear. They're literally not carrying anything dangerous, and they're greeting me. They're acknowledging me. So we subconsciously know that when we can see someone's palms, it means trust, warmth. I'm not hiding anything. We don't like closed palms. So we don't like if someone has their hands in their pockets. If I were to do this whole interview or when I'm on YouTube, if I were to hide my hands from YouTube videos, it would be hard for people to trust me. We actually don't like not being able to see people's hands, especially their palms. We've also noticed anecdotally on my YouTube channel. So I've been doing YouTube since 2007, which is horrifying and shocking. And we've done a video a week since 2007. And what we've noticed is when we use thumbnails on my videos with specific gestures, it doesn't even matter what the gesture is, a 3, a pinpoint, a thumb pinch, any kind of gesture, that thumbnail will get more clicks. Because the person watching goes, well, she has to be saying something. She's gesturing at something. And especially if I'm showing my palm. So like a wave hello, holding up a finger with my palm showing. So we like palms, the trust cue, but we don't like points. And I think I don't actually know why. I should look at the research about what they think the evolutionary reason for this is, but we don't like being pointed at. So I'm going to point at you right now. If you're watching, you don't like it. It makes us feel like we're being accused of. And so you want to be careful if you're on video or you're on stage or you're giving directions. People have the tendency to it's called school marming, and they hold their finger up like that. So I try really hard to always have an open palm. I anecdotally, of course, noticed that Barack Obama, before he ran for president, if you watch very, very old speeches of Barack Obama, he tended to point. He pointed up at the sky and he pointed at the audience. And then around maybe 2 years before he started running for president, he changed to the thumb pinch. So like a very loose fist with his thumb on top. And he started using that as a gesture. And a lot of politicians use that gesture. Why? 1, it's not a point because we don't like being pointed at. And 2, it's a very subtle thumbs up gesture. And in Western cultures, we like that thumbs up gesture. So I think there is something there to even the types of gestures you use can send different signals.
While we're talking about the hands, it gets me thinking about the poker study. So I'd love for you to talk about that. It was fascinating.
Oh, yes. So poker research is so interesting because you're able to see cues play out right in front of you. You're able to see bluffing cues versus truth cues versus concealment cues. So interesting. So, this is one of the poker studies I talk about in the book, which is that they asked people to try to guess if someone had a good hand or not. And they could choose one of three ways to see it. They could see the face of the player, they could see the hands of the player, or they could see the entire upper body of the player. Now, most people in the study, of course, chose the entire body, right? More information is better, right? You want to
I
see
did.
more. Right, of course. You're thinking, I want to see the face and I want to see the hands and I want to see the shoulders. But actually, what they found is the people who chose the hands were the most accurate. Why? Very good poker players, or even mediocre poker players, they know that people are trying to read them. And so it's easiest to control our face. It's also decently easy to control our body posture. Like we can stay very still or add fake movement or slouch if we want to. It's very, very hard to control lying or bluffing gestures. Specifically, they found that people, when they had a good hand, they played smoothly. So they shuffled their cards smoothly. There was no jerky motions. They had no hesitance when they dropped cards in front of them or pulled cards. Whereas people who were bluffing were typically more jerky. They were wasting movements with their hands, nervous movements, but not even that obvious. They were not smooth, not linear with their movements. And so if you just saw the hand gestures, it was almost obvious who had a good and bad hand. So first, if you play poker, that should really help you with both sides, playing and also spotting. The reason why I like this study is not because I need you to necessarily have smooth gestures. That's a hard cue to do, right? It's very hard to control our hands. It's more so that it indicates smoothness and fluidity of movement is in itself a cue. So when people are confident, when they really know their stuff, they're not overthinking their actions. They're not thinking, what should I do with my hands or what should I do with my body? So I don't want you to overthink these cues. I want you to begin to use them naturally. I want you to start with your lowest hanging fruit cues. I want you to use the cues that you already do when you're confident. That fluidity of movement is actually just as important as the movement itself.
Wasn't there a woman who wasn't a poker player and then all of a sudden
Yes.
took on looking at cues and within, I think, a year was able to be at like the final table of some big tournament?
Yes, exactly. So that the study I actually it's an academic study that she used in her book, but I use her study in the book of like, here's someone who literally didn't know how to play poker. She taught herself how to play poker. She taught herself how to read these hands cues, and she was able to, I think she in the end won like, got to the final table, won like 80 grand. One of the top tournaments in the world. Don't quote me on the exact numbers, but she was able to advance very, very quickly in poker using a lot of these cues. And so I think, we can think of the same thing in our life is if we can start to read the right cues and respond to them correctly, if we can show up as our most confident self by sending the right cues, it just helps us advance faster.
One of the cues I'm really curious about, especially as an interviewer, is the nodding head.
Oh,
And I
yes.
found that earlier on when I started doing this 8 years ago, I would nod, nod, nod. I probably nodded the whole time to the guests, whatever they
Yes.
said, even if the most horrible thing. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. So, anyways, I
Yeah,
become more
yeah.
aware of that over time. I'm trying to nod less. But this is something that's practical for everybody because maybe not as much as in a conversation like this where a guest is, you know, having more to say than the interviewer, but we all are in interactions on a daily basis where we're nodding and acknowledging. And how do we know when to nod and when it's too much?
Right. You and I have the same problem, my friend. So we're probably actually, I bet you and I are similar in the charisma scale. So, I bet you we have similar ratings because I also have the same problem. I am a bobbleheader, right? I want to show I'm listening, I'm into you. So I'm like, and I'm nodding a lot. So again, every cue is a spectrum. So you have to think about, am I an over nodder or am I an under nodder? So over nodders typically, but not always, can be people pleasers. We really want to be liked. We really want to encourage people. We typically are cheerleaders and supporters. We tend to be more empathetic. So that comes out in our nonverbal cues with the nod, bobbleheading, overachieving, overeager. The other side of the spectrum is under nodding. This is someone who's seen as emotionless, cold, hard to talk to, intimidating. So my husband is an under nodder. My husband is actually an under signaler. So what happens with him is he will just signal less. So I'll tell him like the most hilarious joke and he'll be like, that's funny. Like totally like no laughter, no nodding. Or I'll be like talking and I'll be like, does that make sense? He's like, yeah, makes total sense. And I'm like, well, can you nod or like give me an eyebrow raise or like a uh-huh? So are you an under expressor? Do you undershow that kind of nonverbal warmth? Because a nod is specifically a warmth cue. So, by the way, this is a cultural note. So, in most cultures, a vertical nod, so an up and down nod means yes or agreement. In India, Pakistan, and Bulgaria, the nods are different. So, if you're in those cultures, the nods are a little different. Otherwise, they're for you. I try to always make cultural notes in the book to honor because we already have it in, I think, 7 or 8 different languages. So, it's always good to know the cultures. So, a vertical nod means yes, I agree with you. And one study found that when people nod, the other person speaks 67% longer. So, as an interviewer, your desire to encourage your guest and to get them to keep talking is innately in you because you do the slow triple nod and they're more likely to speak longer. So, it's actually a beautiful cue and it comes from a really good place, but we have to be careful to not default to nodding. And so, I have to work on nodding less. My husband has to work on nodding more.
Well, one thing that's becoming quite apparent throughout the conversation is balance is key with all of this. And to take that even further, it seems like if you want to have power with these cues, you don't want to overuse them. I think it was when
Right.
you're talking about the hand gestures, using them to highlight. It's like if I'm just going blah, 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 all over the place throughout a whole conversation, that's going to have no power when it comes to something I actually want to highlight that I'm saying.
Right. It's purposeful. I think I have a lot of folks. One of our typical student is a very, very smart, slightly awkward person. Those are our typical students. Someone who is super high in intelligence, but might have just been a little bit behind on the people skills aspect. This is certainly me. And one thing we talk about is being purposeful, not perfect. There is no perfect presence. There is no perfect way to show up. There is no perfect script or perfect interview. And actually trying to be perfect is impossible and will only make you feel pressured. It will only make you feel like I'm in my head too much. Perfect gets you in your head. Purposeful is very different. Purposeful is okay, I'm showing up to a sales meeting or I'm meeting with my boss. What do I want to come across as? Okay, I want to be both warm and I want to be competent. He or she is a little higher on the competence scale. So I'm going to dial up my competence even more. Okay, what cues make me feel natural to do that? All right, hand gestures, absolutely. A lower tone, absolutely. Power gazing, absolutely. Like some of the competence cues. That purpose gives you confidence, right? So it's showing up with a purposeful social goal in mind and then trying to execute it with the cues you're sending.
We're learning a lot about the nitty gritty here and how to apply
Yeah.
this for people that aren't doing it already. But I'm curious how intuition comes into play because there's so many cues we talked about
Yes.
earlier, how they're happening all the time, whether we want them to be or not. So, given that, when we're in a room, say we're in a party and there's all kinds of different people, all kinds of different cues, and our conscious is catching some, our subconscious is catching some, how do we go about using intuition to fit into this?
Oh, your intuition is your superpower. Your brain is extremely adept at reading cues. In fact, a lot of the cues we've found that as people are reading the book, they say, oh, I knew this. I had a feeling about this. So actually, we're just putting a name to what your intuition is already doing, and that makes it faster. I'll give you an example of how this works. So there was a study where make sure I get it right. There was a study where they had people come into the lab and they flashed them from someone else in the room a cue of social rejection. So a social rejection cue is an eye roll, a scoff. It could even be a vocal tone. A vocal tone. So, "Ugh, great idea. An eye roll, contempt. Those are all cues of social rejection. We are very attuned to those as humans. We do not want to get cues of social rejection. So, what they found is even though people had no idea that this cue was being sent to them, once they spotted it, their own pupils dilated. Their pupils dilated so they could see more of their environment. In other words, when we spot a cue of social rejection, before our brain even consciously realizes it, our body reacts to socially survive. Why? If someone sends you a cue of social rejection, you want to see as much as possible. Is anyone else sending me a social cue? What's my escape route? What did I do wrong? What did I miss? So, in that way, your intuition, your physiology is working for you. If you walk into a room or hop on a video call or you're around someone and you don't feel good, you're like, man, like, I'm just like not clicking with this person. I feel drained. I feel dread. That could be that you are spotting cues and your brain is going, beware. Your cortisol is pumping, your heart is pumping, your pupils are dilating. And so, actually being aware of who is causing you dread, where is dread happening, why you suddenly feel foreboding, or the other way. Someone makes you feel great. You catch this amazing energy when you're with someone, you just feel like your best self. Those, I think, are the best ways that we can begin to think about who is serving us and who is not. So that's even like the meta underneath cues is these cues are already affecting you. The question is, can you take advantage of them?
Vanessa, I know you got to go soon, but two more things I want to hit on before we part
Yeah.
ways. We've
Yes.
given tons of practical information. I know people are going to have to go back and rewatch or listen because there's a lot in here,
Yay.
especially if this is new for them. But let's use the example of going to a party. I mentioned the party and all the different people and different cues. Let's give people a few great things they can implement that are really easy to get the ball rolling. Say they're going to a party or even going for
Yeah.
coffee with a friend. What's a few easy things right after this conversation they can apply right away to build that charisma?
Okay, so I know I'm not supposed to do this, but I have to take a book from a cue from my first book, Captivate. So for Captivate, I specifically looked at parties. We actually studied party floor plans, and we found that at networking events, at parties, at bars, the worst thing you can do is stand at the entrance. And a lot of people do this because they're nervous. They stand like right towards the door entrance. People are not ready for connection there. They sometimes stand near the food or near the bathroom. That's also a terrible place to stand because people are usually very distracted by the food. The single best place to stand, this place where people exchange the most cards, got the most contact information, and had the longest conversations was where people exited the bar. And the reason for this is because someone's come in, they've kind of checked out the room, they said hello to the host. Once someone has their drink in hand, whether it's a coffee bar, a water bar, a wine bar, they're like, okay, I'm ready. And if no one's standing there, you get kind of panicked. Have you ever had this where you like turn to the room and you're like, I don't know who to talk to? If you stand right there and you're like, oh, that wine looks great, or what brings you here tonight, or how do you know the host? You are a social savior. So actually, this cue is actually physical. It's from my book Captivate. I want you to stand where people exit when they've just gotten their drink. That's like the best place to stand. Let's do an actual cue this time. The next one is people typically are very aware of eye contact and gaze cues. Like, for example, if I were to look up, it would be very hard for you to not also look up. And that's because we just follow gaze cues. It's a natural human tendency. So if you want to approach someone, you can warn them with your eyes. The longer you make eye contact on the approach, the more likely it is the approach will go well. And if someone doesn't want to be approached, they will often break eye contact. So this is a super easy way to avoid rejection, especially like in a bar or a party, is if you want to approach someone, it could be a friend, could be a new person, make eye contact at least 10 feet away. The public zone is usually 7 feet away or further, so 7 to 10 feet away. Hold eye contact as you make the approach. If they hold it with you, you're good. If they break it, make a left-hand turn. Kind of turn away.
That's important. That's great. A few I'll add to that is dropping the shoulders. So you want to make sure your shoulders are
Yes.
relaxed, facing the person head on, and then spreading those feet apart just a couple of inches. I know those are three
Yes.
that
Yes.
stuck
Taking
out
up
from
space.
reading your book.
Woo! I'm always so curious which ones people like, they stick to because I love them all. I cannot pick a favorite. So it's so interesting which ones you pick.
Vanessa, before we part ways, this is going to be the last question here. We
Yes.
opened up, and I want to come full circle, talking about top things people don't know they're doing that is killing their charisma. We talked about the lip purse. Let's give people
Yes.
one or two more of those, and then we'll say goodbye.
I'm going to give the most important one, which is a relatively general, but it is the most important, which is under cueing. So I briefly mentioned the danger zone. And I think that right now, people think that it looks professional to be stoic, to not show emotions, to not let anyone read their face. I mean, for goodness sakes, we even Botox our face to not show our expressions. And so the biggest cue that is probably undermining you is showing no cues at all or trying to go mute. And going mute is in itself a cue. When someone goes mute, you're literally taking away their ability to read you and their ability to know how to behave. Your cues tell others how to treat you. So if you show warmth, you are going to get more warmth. If you show competence, you are going to get more competence. If you don't show enough of either, you're not going to get much at all. And so when we are dismissed and underestimated and doubted, a lot of the times they'll go, I have such smart people who come and they say, I don't know why people aren't listening to my ideas. People don't like me. I can't build rapport. And we watch a video of them and they are sending nothing. Like they're completely still and frozen, no gestures, no facial expressions, even a monotone voice to be as, like they say, they're being casual. So actually what I would say is if you're in that bucket, it's incredibly important. And I know it takes courage. I know it takes courage to try cues on, especially if they don't come naturally to you. But cues help people treat you well.
Talk about people in your life that have been there for a long time. And now that you're doing this work in cues and they know that you're the expert and you're probably analyzing a lot of what they're doing as you
Yeah.
interact, has that changed your
Yeah.
interactions?
Yes, I went through a phase. I called it my hard truth, not ignorant bliss phase, where I had people in my life who were hiding things, who made me feel nervous, who had a lot of self deception. And I just made the choice. And thank goodness my husband and I have been together for 17 years. So he's been on this journey with me, learning cues along with me. I said to him, I would rather live in hard truth than ignorant bliss. I would rather have amazing, high quality relationships where I'm not even having to think about cues than relationships where I'm always looking over my shoulder. And that was some hard truth. I had to set up some boundaries and, gently let some people go in my life. And I think that was really empowering because it gave me my social energy back. I was so drained socially. I wondered why I felt awkward. A lot of it was because I was reading all these cues that I didn't like. And so kind of something I would encourage you to think about is, as you read, are there people who are sending you cues who don't make you feel good? Are there people who send you cues that confuse you? I think that you are worth having relationships in your life that make you feel good, that are positively contagious, that send good cues to you and send good cues back, and it helps everyone.
Vanessa, thank you for coming on the show. Love the conversation. Love the book. The book is Cues. We're going to link up the book, your social media, everything in the show notes. And I
Woo!
also want to congratulate you. I know you have another baby coming soon.
I
And I
do.
want to thank you
You
for
can't
coming
even
on the show.
see.
I know there's a lot going on with the book release this year and baby coming. And I'm just so happy for you and congrats on everything.
Oh.
Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for having me on, for featuring this work, for helping people doing what you do. And thank you also for everyone who listened and gave us all your time. I'm so grateful for you as well. So thank you.
Now that you're done my conversation with Vanessa, stick around here and catch my chat with Mel, where you're going to learn one habit that'll change your life. I'll see you over there.
And the high five habit, this simple little science-backed morning ritual, has helped me learn how to push through